The neon lights of Europa Station cast shifting shadows across Riker Hayes's face as he made his final security sweep of the diplomatic quarter. The massive space station, humanity's crown jewel in Jupiter's orbit, never truly slept. Even at this late hour, the gentle hum of life support systems mixed with distant conversations in a dozen different languages. Riker's enhanced eyes, courtesy of his time in the Terran Special Forces, scanned the corridors with practiced efficiency. 10 years of private security work after leaving the military had taught him that trouble usually struck when everything seemed perfectly calm. The weight of his pulse pistol against his thigh was reassuring, though he hadn't needed to draw it in months. The upcoming Celestian-Human Summit had everyone on edge. The Celestians, with their crystalline-based biology and advanced technology, had been Earth's most important alien allies for the past decade. But lately, tensions had been rising over mining rights in the Kuiper Belt. A flash of movement caught his attention, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. Riker slowed his pace, maintaining his casual demeanor while his augmented senses went into overdrive. The diplomatic quarter should have been empty at this hour, save for essential personnel. The figure emerged from behind a pillar, and Riker's breath caught in his throat. She moved with an otherworldly grace, her skin shimmering with an internal light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, a characteristic of her species. Her formal robes, woven with what appeared to be living crystal, marked her as Celestian nobility. "Ambassador," he said, inclining his head slightly. "The diplomatic quarter is supposed to be cleared for security sweeps at this hour." She turned toward him, and Riker found himself staring into eyes that resembled spiral galaxies, another unique Celestian trait. "I am not an ambassador," she corrected, her voice carrying the musical quality typical of her kind. "I am Talia Voss, cultural attaché to the Celestian Embassy." Before Riker could respond, his enhanced hearing picked up a subtle click from above. Without thinking, he launched himself forward, tackling Talia as a shower of crystalline shards, deadly projectiles favored by Celestian assassins, rained down where she had been standing. They rolled behind a nearby column, Riker's body shielding hers. The crystalline shards embedded themselves in the floor with enough force to pierce standard armor. His mind raced through possible scenarios. This was no random attack. The timing, the weapons, the target, this was professional. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his pulse pistol. The assassin would have to move positions now that their initial attack had failed. That would be their chance. "There are two of them," Talia whispered, her voice steady despite the situation. Riker glanced at her in surprise. "I can sense the disruption patterns in the station's crystal matrices. One above, one to the east." "Right. Celestians could perceive things humans couldn't, especially involving crystalline structures. Can you tell if they're moving?" "The one above is. The other." She closed her galaxy eyes for a moment. "Is trying to flank us." Riker tapped his wrist computer, sending out a silent alarm to station security. But help would take precious minutes to arrive. He needed to act now. A second volley of crystal shards struck their cover, and Riker heard the distinctive sound of boots on metal. The assassin was indeed moving. He risked a quick look around the column, his enhanced vision catching a glimpse of a figure in chameleon armor. "When I move, head for the secure room at the end of the corridor," he told Talia. "The door will recognize your biosignature. And leave you to face them alone? That would be inefficient." Before he could argue, she pressed her hand against the column. The crystal fragments scattered across the floor began to vibrate. Suddenly, they shot upward like reverse rainfall, forcing one of the assassins to dive from their perch. Riker didn't waste the opportunity. 3 rapid shots from his pulse pistol caught the falling assassin, the energy bursts shorting out their chameleon armor. They hit the ground hard, unconscious or dead. The second assassin opened fire with a more conventional plasma weapon. Riker pulled Talia close, spinning them behind another column as superheated plasma scorched the air where they'd been. That was impressive, he said, referring to her crystal control. They don't teach that at diplomatic school. A small smile played across her luminescent features. There is much about me that isn't in any official record, Mr. Hayes. You know my name? I make it a point to know everyone who might be worth knowing on this station. She paused, her galaxy eyes widening. They're not alone. More are coming. Riker heard it too now, multiple sets of footsteps approaching from both directions. They were about to be boxed in. That secure room is looking better by the minute. Agreed. But I'm not leaving you behind. She touched his arm, and suddenly his skin tingled with a strange energy. I've temporarily altered the crystalline structure of your cellular matrix. You're now partially phase-shifted, most energy weapons will pass through you. Riker stared at his slightly translucent hand. That's definitely not standard diplomatic training. Run now, question later. Deal. They broke cover together, sprinting for the secure room. Plasma fire erupted from both directions, passing harmlessly through Riker just as Talia had promised. He returned fire with his pulse pistol, forcing their attackers to seek cover. Talia reached the secure room first, pressing her hand against the scanner. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Riker backed in after her, maintaining covering fire until the heavy doors sealed. Inside, Riker finally allowed himself to catch his breath. Want to tell me what that was all about? Those weren't common assassins. Their tactics, their tech, they're military trained. Talia's inner light pulsed with what he was learning to recognize as concern. It seems my presence here has been discovered sooner than expected. She met his gaze directly. I'm not really a cultural attaché, Mr. Hayes. I'm here because we believe someone within both our governments is actively working to spark a war between our species. Those assassins were meant to make my death look like a human attack. Riker holstered his weapon, studying her carefully. And you're telling me this because? Because you just proved yourself willing to risk your life for a stranger, and because. She gestured to his still slightly translucent form. I've literally altered your molecular structure. That creates a certain bond of trust, doesn't it? He couldn't help but laugh. I suppose it does. His expression turned serious. Station security will be here soon. We should get our story straight. Actually, Talia said, her galaxy eyes gleaming with something that looked suspiciously like mischief, I have a better idea. How would you like a new job? One that involves keeping me alive long enough to prevent an interstellar war? Riker looked at his translucent hand, then back at the fascinating alien who had just turned his world upside down. Will it always be this exciting? Oh, Mr. Hayes, she smiled, her inner light pulsing brighter, this was just the beginning. The private quarters assigned to Talia within the Celestian embassy put Riker's old military housing to shame. Crystalline walls shifted colors with her moods, currently displaying deep blues and purples that made the space feel like the inside of a nebula. After the attack 3 days ago, he'd been officially reassigned as her personal security detail, a position that was proving more complex by the hour. They're calling it a rogue operation, Riker reported, scanning through the official investigation findings on his datapad. According to this, the surviving assassin claims they were hired by separatists from the Kuiper colonies. He looked up at Talia, who was manipulating a three-dimensional hologram of Europa Station's crystal infrastructure. Convenient explanation. Too convenient, she agreed, her fingers dancing through the light display. The Kuiper separatists lack the resources for military-grade chameleon armor. Someone is trying very hard to create a paper trail that leads nowhere. Riker watched her work, still fascinated by how the light from the hologram played across her crystalline skin. In the past few days, he'd learned that Talia's ability to manipulate crystalline structures went far beyond normal Celestian capabilities. She was part of something called the Prismatic Guard, an elite group he strongly suspected was their version of special forces. Your security upgrades are impressive, she commented, gesturing to the new systems he'd installed. Though I notice you've added quite a few traditional human measures alongside the crystal-based ones. Best security combines multiple approaches, he said, moving to stand beside her. Speaking of which, we need to talk about tomorrow's summit preparation meeting. I don't like the exposure in the main chamber. Talia's inner light pulsed with what he now recognized as amusement. You don't like any situation where you can't control all the variables. That's why I'm still alive. He pointed to several spots on the hologram. These maintenance access points are already secured, she finished, expanding that section of the display. I've modified the crystal matrices throughout that entire sector. Nothing larger than a dust particle can pass through without my knowledge. Riker raised an eyebrow. Impressive. But you can't maintain that level of concentration during diplomatic negotiations. No, she admitted, turning to face him. That's why I have you. The way she said it sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Riker found himself lost in those swirling galaxies. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibilities. A soft chime from his datapad broke the moment. Speaking of the meeting, he said, checking the message, my contact in station security came through. He found something interesting about one of the delegates. Talia waved her hand, dismissing the hologram. Tell me. Council member Jared Kane. His financial records show regular deposits from a shell company based in the Kuiper Belt. The same company that supposedly hired our assassins. Kane. Talia's inner light flickered with surprise. He's one of the strongest advocates for peaceful cooperation between our species. Perfect cover, Riker pointed out. No one would suspect him of trying to sabotage relations. But here's where it gets interesting, the shell company's quantum encryption signature matches patterns used by Celestian military intelligence. Talia went very still, her crystalline skin taking on a deep, dark purple hue. That's impossible. Those signatures are unbreakable. Unless someone high up in your military is involved. Riker watched her carefully. How deep does this conspiracy go, Talia? She began pacing, her formal robes shimming with each movement. The Prismatic Guard has suspected corruption within our highest ranks for months, but we could never prove it. If what you're saying is true. She stopped suddenly. We need to get into Kane's private quarters. Already planning to. But we'll need a distraction during the meeting tomorrow. Something big enough to draw security's attention without causing a panic. A small smile played across Talia's luminescent features. Leave that to me. Though I should warn you, Kane's quarters will be protected by both human and Celestian security measures. Good thing I have an expert in Celestian systems on my side. Riker stepped closer, close enough to feel the slight temperature difference that all Celestians radiated. Unless you don't trust a human to handle your military secrets? Riker, she said softly, reaching up to touch his face. Her fingers left trails of tingling energy across his skin. I trust you with far more than that. The touch sent sparks through his nervous system, a unique sensation he was becoming addictively familiar with. Every time they made contact, the residual effects of her molecular manipulation seemed to strengthen the connection between them. We should review the security footage from Kane's previous meetings, he said, reluctantly stepping back. Look for patterns in his routine. Always so focused on the mission. There was something in her voice, disappointment? Amusement? With Celestians, it was often hard to tell. They spent the next few hours analyzing data, building their plan for tomorrow. But Riker found his attention constantly drawn to Talia, the grace of her movements, the way her inner light brightened when she made a discovery, the musical quality of her laugh when he made a dry observation about human bureaucracy. He was falling for her, he realized. Not just her otherworldly beauty or her brilliant mind, but everything about her. The way she could shift from deadly serious to playfully mysterious in moments. Her dedication to preventing a war that would devastate both their species. The trust she placed in him despite every reason not to. "You're staring," she said, not looking up from her work. "Professional observation," he replied smoothly. "Part of my job." "Really?" Now she did look at him, her galaxy eyes swirling with something that made his pulse quicken. "And what professional observations have you made?" "That you're worried about tomorrow. Your light pulses faster when you're concerned." Her expression softened. "The fact that you can read my bioluminescence so well is intriguing." She moved closer, until they were barely inches apart. "What else can you read?" "That we're both looking for excuses not to focus on work right now." "Perhaps," she whispered, her light pulsing in a pattern he'd never seen before, "we've focused enough for one night." The kiss, when it came, felt like touching a star, electric and dangerous and absolutely right. Her crystalline skin hummed against his, the energy between them building until Riker could swear he saw entire universes behind his closed eyes. Tomorrow they would risk everything to expose a conspiracy that threatened both their worlds. Tonight, they discovered that some boundaries were meant to be crossed, some risks worth taking, and some feelings transcended the differences between species. The summit preparation meeting was going exactly as planned, which made Riker incredibly nervous. In his experience, when things went smoothly, disaster usually lurked around the corner. From his position along the chamber's wall, he watched Talia engage in diplomatic discourse with the assembled delegates. She played her role perfectly, the earnest cultural attaché concerned about minor trade disputes. No one would guess she was about to create chaos. Council member Kane sat at the main table, the picture of diplomatic dignity in his expensive suit. His salt and pepper hair and grandfatherly smile made him look more like a kindly professor than someone potentially orchestrating an interstellar war. But Riker had learned long ago that the most dangerous predators often wore the friendliest faces. "The Kuiper Belt situation requires a delicate touch," Kane was saying, his voice carrying the practiced gravitas of a career politician. "We cannot allow extremist elements to dash." The crystal chandelier above the table shattered. Fragments rained down in a deadly shower, but instead of falling randomly, they danced through the air in complex patterns, forming what appeared to be attacking creatures before dissolving into harmless dust. Delegates screamed and ducked for cover as security personnel rushed to evacuate the room. In the confusion, Riker slipped away through a service corridor. Talia's distraction was masterful, spectacular enough to demand attention but ultimately harmless. More importantly, it would keep station security occupied for at least 20 minutes. He reached Kane's private quarters in under 2 minutes. The outer door's security system was high-end but standard issue. His military override codes, courtesy of his former Special Forces status, made short work of it. Inside, he faced more sophisticated challenges. Crystal-based security measures hummed with dangerous energy, but Talia had prepared him for these. He pressed his palm against the main crystal node, letting the residual energy from her molecular manipulation interact with the security field. The crystals recognized him as partially Celestian and powered down. "I'm in," he subvocalized, knowing the quantum-entangled communicator embedded in his collar would relay the message to Talia. "Good," her musical voice whispered in his ear. "You have 18 minutes before security protocols reset." Riker moved efficiently through the quarters, his enhanced eyes scanning for hidden compartments or data storage units. Kane's private office yielded nothing unusual until he reached the desk. There, beneath layers of quantum shielding, he found what they were looking for, a crystal matrix communication hub. Found it. Initiating download. He pressed a specialized device against the hub, copying its contents. The process seemed agonizingly slow, each percentage point crawling by as he listened for approaching footsteps. "Riker." Talia's voice carried an edge of urgency. "We have a problem." Kane left the meeting before my distraction. He's heading your way. Riker cursed softly. The download was only at 60%. How long? 2 minutes, maybe less. Too long. He needed options. Can you slow him down? Not without revealing myself. The crystal matrices in that section are too basic to manipulate subtly. Riker's mind raced through scenarios. What about a station-wide security alert? Something to force him to respond? That would bring too much attention to this sector. She paused. Wait. Something's wrong. The energy patterns in the station's crystal infrastructure are changing. Riker, get out now. He started to respond but stopped as the room's temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the windows, spreading with unnatural speed. The crystal security measures he'd bypassed began to pulse with a sickly green light. They're activating the quantum lockdown protocols, Talia said, real fear in her voice. If you're caught in there when they engage. Riker didn't need her to finish. Quantum lockdown would seal the room in a bubble of altered spacetime. Anyone inside would be trapped in a moment of frozen time until the protocols were lifted, if they survived the process. The download was at 85%. Almost there. Riker, please. The emotion in her voice made his chest tight. The data isn't worth your life. Trust me, he said, watching Frost crawl up his arms. The device showed 92%. The door chimed, someone entering their override codes. 95%. I traced the energy signature, Talia said quickly. The lockdown protocols are being activated from the Celestian military vessel that docked this morning. This goes higher than Kane. 98%. The door began to cycle open. Riker. I love you too, he said, and yanked the device free at 99%. The crystal matrix hub shattered from the incomplete download, but he had what they needed. He dove for the window as quantum energy flooded the room. The reinforced glass, already weakened by the extreme cold, shattered under his enhanced strength. As he fell toward the lower levels of the station, he caught a glimpse of Kane in the doorway, face contorted with rage. Riker's military augments calculated trajectory and wind resistance automatically. He angled his body, aiming for a maintenance platform 3 levels down. The impact would hurt, but his reinforced skeleton could take it. He hit hard, rolling to absorb the shock. Pain lanced through his shoulder, something was definitely broken. But he was alive and, more importantly, he had the data. I'm out, he managed through gritted teeth. Meeting point 2? Already on my way. Talia's voice shook with relief. And Riker? We're going to talk about what you just said. He smiled despite the pain. Looking forward to it. The sound of security drones approaching spurred him into motion. His shoulder screamed in protest as he climbed down to the maintenance tunnels, but he pushed through it. The data he'd stolen could prove the conspiracy reached into the highest levels of the Celestian military. The question was, how many humans were involved as well? More importantly, who could they trust with this information? The corruption clearly ran deeper than they'd imagined, and they'd just made some very powerful enemies. As he navigated the service corridors toward their rendezvous point, Riker couldn't help but smile. Life had been simpler before he met Talia, but it had also been emptier. Now he was running from both human and alien authorities, nursing a broken shoulder, carrying stolen military secrets, and hopelessly in love with a woman who literally came from another world. He wouldn't have it any other way. The maintenance tunnels beneath Europa Station's commercial district had never been meant for human habitation, but they made an excellent hiding place. Riker sat beside a humming power conduit, its warmth helping to ward off the chill that seemed permanently settled in his bones since the quantum lockdown incident. Talia's hands moved with practiced precision as she adjusted his makeshift sling. Her touch left trails of warmth that seemed to reach beneath his skin, her natural healing abilities slowly mending his broken shoulder. "You're lucky the quantum energy only grazed you," she said softly. "Direct exposure would have torn you apart at the molecular level." "Didn't feel lucky at the time." He watched her work, still amazed by how her crystalline skin caught and refracted the dim light. Even here, hiding in the bowels of the station with both human and Celestian authorities hunting them, she somehow managed to look ethereal. The data device sat between them, its contents now decrypted thanks to Talia's expertise. What they'd found was worse than either had imagined. "The Prismatic Guard was right about corruption in our military," Talia said, her galaxy eyes dimming with sadness. "But we never suspected it went this far." "High Commander Voss." "Your father," Riker added quietly. She nodded, her inner light pulsing with complex emotions. "He's been working with a human faction called the Terra Prima movement. They believe humanity should remain separate from all alien influences." Her fingers traced absent patterns on his arm. "The assassins, the false evidence against the Kuiper separatists, it was all orchestrated to push both sides toward war. A war that would effectively end any possibility of human-Celestian cooperation." Riker caught her hand, intertwining their fingers. The energy between them hummed like a living thing. "But why? What does either side gain from that?" "Power." A new voice echoed through the tunnel. "Pure, uncontested power." They sprang apart as a figure emerged from the shadows. Riker reached for his weapon but stopped when he recognized the face, though last time he'd seen it, it had been on a viewscreen during tactical briefings. "Admiral Marcus Pierce," he said carefully. "Head of station security and, if I remember correctly, formally censured for your anti-alien stance 3 years ago." Pierce smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good memory, Hayes. Should have known you'd be trouble when I saw your service record. Special Forces operatives never really retire, do they?" More figures emerged from the shadows, at least 6 armed personnel in stealth suits. Riker's enhanced vision picked up the subtle shimmer of active camouflage systems. They'd been surrounded before they even knew they had company. "How did you find us?" Talia demanded, her skin taking on the deep purple hue of battle readiness. "Oh, my dear," Pierce's smile widened, "we never lost you. In fact, you've performed admirably, exactly as your father predicted you would." Riker felt Talia go rigid beside him. "What? Did you really think it was coincidence that you were assigned to investigate the corruption? That you just happened to be in the right place to meet Mr. Hayes?" Pierce spread his hands. "Your father knew your principles would never allow you to support our cause willingly. So he made you our unwitting agent instead." The assassination attempt, Riker realized. It was staged. "You needed us to work together, to trust each other." "Very good." Pierce nodded approvingly. "We needed someone who could access both human and Celestian systems, who could move freely between our worlds. Your connection made that possible." Talia's inner light flared with dangerous intensity. "The data we stole was exactly what we wanted you to find. Once you present evidence of your father's conspiracy to the human authorities, it will confirm their worst fears about Celestian duplicity. When he reveals your theft of military secrets and collaboration with a human agent, our hardliners will have all the justification they need. War becomes inevitable," Riker finished. "And you and your allies take control in the chaos." "A new order," Pierce agreed. "Pure human, pure Celestian, each race strong in its isolation." He raised an eyebrow at their joined hands. "No more of this unnatural mixing." Riker felt Talia's fingers tighten around his. Through their contact, he sensed her gathering power, preparing to fight. But they were outnumbered, and Pierce's men had null field generators that could disrupt Celestian abilities. Then he noticed something, a subtle vibration in the power conduit behind them. Talia wasn't gathering power for an attack. She was interfacing with the station's crystal matrices, using them to send a message. But to whom? I'm curious, he said, buying time. How did you convince the High Commander to sacrifice his own daughter? Pain flickered across Talia's features, but Pierce laughed. Convince him? It was his idea. The High Commander understands that personal attachments must be sacrificed for the greater good. Though I admit, your romance was an unexpected but useful development. It makes the betrayal so much more convincing. The vibrations in the conduit were growing stronger. Whatever Talia was planning, it was building to something big. You're wrong about one thing, Talia said, her voice carrying that musical quality that Riker had learned meant she was absolutely certain about something. My father may have placed me here, may have manipulated events to serve his purposes. Her galaxy eyes blazed. But he forgot the most important lesson of the prismatic guard: crystals reflect truth in all directions. The conduit exploded. Not with fire or shrapnel, but with pure crystalline energy. The maintenance tunnel filled with blindingly bright shards that moved with purpose, forming barriers between Pierce's men and their targets. Through the chaos, Riker glimpsed other figures emerging from side tunnels, Celestians in combat armor, their crystalline weapons humming with deadly purpose. The rest of the prismatic guard, Talia explained as she pulled him toward an escape route. They've been watching through the station's crystal matrices since we sent the first message. Every word Pierce said was recorded. Riker grinned despite the pain in his shoulder. You played him. We played him, she corrected. Your questions were perfect. But we need to move. This evidence won't matter if we don't get it to the right people. They ran as combat erupted behind them, Pierce's outraged shouts echoing through the tunnels. But Riker knew this wasn't over. They'd exposed one layer of the conspiracy, but Pierce's faction wasn't working alone. Somewhere above them, High Commander Voss was surely preparing his own countermoves. The next few hours would determine the fate of human-Celestian relations for generations to come. And at the center of it all, a human soldier and a Celestian warrior had found something worth fighting for, not just peace between their peoples, but a future together that proved their enemy's fundamental assumption wrong. Love didn't make them weak. It made them stronger than anyone had anticipated. The Celestian diplomatic vessel, Crystal Dawn, hung against the backdrop of Jupiter like a shard of starlight. Riker stood at the viewport of their stolen shuttle, watching as they approached. Beside him, Talia's inner light pulsed with complex emotions. They were about to confront her father, the man who had orchestrated everything. The prismatic guard has secured the evidence from the station, she said, checking the quantum-encrypted communications. Pierce and his conspirators are in custody. But none of that matters if we can't stop my father from implementing the final phase of his plan. Riker nodded grimly. The data they decoded had revealed the true horror of High Commander Voss's scheme. The Terra Prima movement was just a pawn. The real plan involved using experimental quantum technology to create an impenetrable barrier between human and Celestian space. Millions would die in the initial energy wave, and countless more would suffer as trade routes and colonies were cut off. He's not expecting us, Riker said, checking his weapons one last time. His shoulder still ached, but Talia's healing touch had done wonders. The guard's attack on Pierce should have him convinced we're still hiding on the station. No. Talia's galaxy eyes fixed on the approaching ship. He's expecting us. He knows me too well, knows I would never run from this fight. Her hand found his. Just as he knew I would find you. The energy between them hummed with increased intensity. Since their first touch, their connection had grown stronger, deeper. Riker could now sense her emotions as clearly as she could read his bioluminescence. You think he planned that too? Us? She turned to face him, her crystalline features softening. He planned for me to use you, for you to be a means to an end. He didn't plan for this. She pressed her free hand against his chest, where his heart beat in sync with her inner light. Some things can't be calculated or controlled. Their shuttle's autopilot chimed. They were approaching the Crystal Dawn's docking bay. Riker pulled Talia close, kissing her with all the emotion he couldn't put into words. If they failed here, this might be their last chance. Together, he whispered against her lips. Always. The docking procedure went smoothly, too smoothly. No challenges, no security scans. The ship was expecting them, just as Talia had predicted. They moved through the crystalline corridors carefully, but encountered no resistance. "He's in the quantum core chamber," Talia said, reading the ship's crystal matrices. "The barrier technology is already powering up." They found High Commander Voss exactly where expected, standing before a massive crystal array that pulsed with otherworldly energy. He turned as they entered, his face a more angular, masculine version of Talia's. His inner light pulsed with a cold, steady rhythm. "Daughter," he said, his voice carrying none of the musical quality Riker associated with Celestians. "And her human protector. Right on schedule." "It's over, Father." Talia's skin shifted to battle-ready purple. "Pierce is captured. The evidence of your conspiracy is being broadcast to both governments as we speak." "Evidence?" Voss actually smiled. "Of a plan to preserve the purity of both our races? To prevent the dilution of our heritage?" His eyes fixed on their joined hands. "You prove my point with every moment you spend together." "You're wrong," Riker stepped forward. "Your barrier won't preserve anything. It'll kill millions. A necessary sacrifice to prevent a greater tragedy." Voss gestured to the humming crystal array. "Look at my daughter, her power diminished by emotional attachment to a lesser being. This connection between you weakens her, corrupts her pure Celestian nature." Talia's laugh was unexpected, clear and musical and genuinely amused. "You really don't understand, do you? Everything you taught me about crystal resonance, about the fundamental frequencies that bind reality together." She squeezed Riker's hand. "You never realized the most basic truth: harmony doesn't mean uniformity." She raised her free hand, and the crystals around them began to sing. Not the cold, controlled hum of Voss's barrier technology, but a complex melody of overlapping frequencies. Riker felt the energy flow through their joined hands, his partially crystalline cellular structure resonating with hers. Voss's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Showing you what real power looks like." Talia's inner light blazed like a newborn star. "The strength that comes from embracing connection rather than fearing it." The crystal array's rhythm faltered, its carefully calibrated frequencies disrupted by the new harmony Talia was creating. But Voss wasn't finished. He slammed his hand onto a control panel, and quantum energy burst from the array in a devastating wave. Riker moved to shield Talia, but she held him firm. Together, they stood as the energy rushed toward them, and split around their joined forms like water around a stone. "Impossible," Voss whispered. "No," Talia said. "Inevitable. Life finds harmony, Father. Fighting that natural law is what brings destruction." The quantum barrier technology overloaded, crystal matrices shattering in cascading waves of light. Voss reached for a weapon, but Riker was faster. One shot from his pulse pistol, and the High Commander collapsed, disabled but alive to face justice. As prismatic guard forces swarmed the ship, responding to Talia's signal, Riker pulled her into his arms. Around them, the broken crystals hummed with a new frequency, not the pure tones Voss had tried to enforce, but a complex harmony of human and Celestian energies combined. "You know," he said, "when I took that security job on Europa Station, I was just looking for something quieter than military life." Talia's galaxy eyes sparkled with mischief. "And instead you found an interstellar conspiracy, got caught in a quantum lockdown, and fell in love with an alien. Best career move I ever made." He touched her crystalline cheek. "Though I have to ask, what happens now?" Your father wasn't entirely wrong about one thing. No one's ever tried to make this work before, human and Celestian. That's not true, she corrected him. No one's ever succeeded before. But then, no one else ever had quantum resonance on their side. She pressed her forehead to his, their energies harmonizing. Some bonds transcend species, transcend space and time themselves. We're living proof of that. Above them, Jupiter's great red storm swirled in its endless dance, while below, Europa Station continued its orbit, human and Celestian working together to build something new. The conspiracy to separate their peoples had failed, shattered by the very force its architects had failed to understand. Love, in all its infinite varieties, could not be contained by barriers of any kind. Riker kissed her again, feeling the familiar electric tingle of their molecular resonance. They had helped save 2 civilizations, but more importantly, they had proved that the space between stars was not a void to be feared, but a bridge to be crossed by those brave enough to try. So, he said, ready for our next adventure? Talia's answering smile lit up the chamber like a constellation. With you? Always.